Welcome to everyone who's joining us. I'm Sharon Constanson. I'm chairman of the South African Chamber of Commerce. We have Lord Peter Hain. I'll introduce him in a moment. We have His Excellency Jeremiah, known to us as Kingsley Mamabolo, High Commissioner from South Africa to London, and we'll be hearing from him shortly, and I'll introduce him fully as well. And then after that, we will hear from Tricia Simmons, who is I don't actually know what your title is, but basically AXA. She's the one who makes sure all the anti-apartheid stuff lands successfully and has done extremely well in that space. So what is the role of the Chamber? Why am I sitting in amongst these amazing people and going to share an hour with them to your benefit? As the Chamber, we are interested in trade. We're interested in businesses doing business together with each other. We are interested in promoting South Africa in the UK environment. And we're actually running a program this year related to this project called South Africa in the City, which is bringing South Africa into the financial services sector in a way that is different to what has been achieved so far. So making sure that we pull those different strings together, we look to find out and lobby to government on the UK and South African side to promote trade, work with our respective trade commissioners, see what we can do to try and create an awareness of South Africa to the exporting market here in the UK, which is a major drive the UK is focused on at the moment as well. So that's where we sort of pull the strings together. And when Kingsley made contact, said, well, what can we do? And Tricia made contact, said, what can we do? And Lord Hain, in a similar vein, we said, well, we can be one of the vehicles that tries to highlight some of the activities that the UK are doing during this year to commemorate a major 30 years that we have achieved. First of all, the event in 1994, and then what we've achieved since then. All good, not all good. We have had some challenges during this period, which we are going to cover today as well. So I'm not the person you're going to look to speak to most. At this point, I'm going to take the honor of introducing Lord Hain, who is a senior minister for 12 years in the Blair government, Gordon Brown government, Secretary of State for Wales and Northern Ireland, and Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, leader of the Commons. He was also Europe minister and a foreign minister and an energy minister. And at that point, I'm going to stop because he's done a lot in the UK environment. But when he was younger, Peter was known as the lead of the anti-apartheid movement and trying to get a voice and an understanding from the world of what was going on in South Africa and finding ways to make a change, which in many of his eminent ways he has absolutely achieved. But I want to share one story about him, or fact is probably a better way to describe it. He is a man who's produced 21 books, not 5 or 6, which I know about.
27, actually, Sharon.
Oh, goodness me, my facts are six story books behind. Oh, my goodness, Peter, even more. So a major achievement. I don't know when he does this because he's probably one of the busiest ministers and members of parliament and helping in so many ways in business, lecturing and charities and acts. So he is everywhere. So thank you, Peter, and your 27 books, which are amazing. The last ones are novels, in inverted commas novels, but they're informed with history, are absolutely fascinating and really worth a read. I picked one up at one stage and can't put it down. It is really, really interesting. So, Peter, if you could maybe share with us, you've been through the anti-apartheid movement. From a young boy, I went to the play that was done on your family here in the UK in the theatres and learned even more than I had already learned about you and the trials and tribulations your family had to go through before having to go into exile and all the things you've done since then that led us as a country to 1994. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Sharon, and thank you all for joining us. I'm looking forward to learning from you and listening as well. I'd like to take you back 30 years to that first democratic election at the end of April 1994. I was a British parliamentary observer going back to the country of my childhood to see democracy awakening, and it was a joyous experience. I was in Orlando West, the home of Nelson Mandela and Walter Sisulu and other key freedom fighters. And it was just incredible watching people queuing away into the early morning mist at dawn as they waited to vote for the first time in their lives. Women in their 90s, young guys in trainers, everybody expressing the joy of that occasion. And I mention that because in today's world and all the brickbats that are hurled at South Africa, some of them justified, about the corruption and the power cuts and things like that, people forget how far the country's traveled. And whenever I go back, as I do frequently, in fact, I'm going for the Franschhoek Literary Festival to talk about one of my new books, a thriller, this weekend, I'm filled with joy the moment I land. Not that I'm unaware, nobody could be, of the problems, they're enormous. Not that I approve of the way that political leaders have betrayed a lot of the legacy of the freedom struggle. Of course I don't. But it is such a different country from the one I left as a 16-year-old, unwillingly propelled into exile when my dad was stopped working as an architect in Pretoria, having been jailed and banned by the government. And we had to leave the ocean, in an ocean liner at Cape Town docks, and we were escorted by the special branch to make sure we boarded the ship to leave. So it's a very different world to go back now, to talk openly, to be interviewed on the media, to teach, as I do at Pretoria University's Business School Gibbs in Joburg, and to just experience the kind of country South Africa always could have been were it not for the brutal apartheid police state and how much misery and oppression and horror it caused to everybody. So by all means, don't close your eyes, and nobody should, to the problems in the country, but remember how far we have traveled, and also remember something that people tend to take for granted today. They take for granted that Nelson Mandela walked from Victor Verster prison to freedom in February 1990 for the first time in 27 years. They take that for granted. They take for granted that he was 4 years later elected president of the country. But it was only after a very long and hard battle in which members of the anti-apartheid movement in Britain joined ANC stalwarts like our High Commissioner in battling for freedom, in battling for democracy, and the opportunity for everybody to make their way in the world, regardless of their color of their skin, primarily, but also their gender or their disability or their religion or any other form of inequality. It was a very hard fight. People died for it. People were tortured for it. People were imprisoned for it. People were disappeared by the security forces, never to be discovered by their families. And it was only won after anti-apartheid movements, the worldwide, took boycott action and sport, with which I was associated primarily, and in many other ways to win that battle. And of course, Oliver Tambo leading the international struggle from London and from the bush in Africa was absolutely key to that as well. The point I want to make is this was a hard struggle. Don't take it for granted. And the thing that I've also learned about the last 30 years is you cannot assume that at any one time you've won that struggle. As we've seen in Britain in recent years, as Sharon mentioned, the 12 years I spent in the last Labour government, when, without going into the detail, because it's not about that, we doubled health spending and school spending and trebled overseas aid and development. And the country was a very different country when we left office in 2010. And Britain's had tremendous problems ever since. So South Africa's not alone in having its problems, but what it shows is that you've got to keep fighting for the values of democracy and social justice and human rights and equal opportunities. These are not things won or lost at any one time. And I think many of us felt in And I felt watching constitutional apartheid being exercised in front of me as a parliamentary observer in that first ever democratic election. It was such an incredible, moving and joyous occasion that you in a sense felt the battle had been won. But what I think we've learned the last 30 years is it never has been won. You've got to keep fighting it. And the role of business, those South Africans who've relocated to the UK to run successful businesses, many of you probably taking part in this webinar, or whether it's Action for Southern Africa, led by its director, Tricia Simmons, doing such an effective job on bringing to attention the concerns of not just South Africa, but the whole of the Southern Africa region. There are a lot of people who still have a soft spot in their hearts in the world for South Africa. Some of that is been tarnished by events since, but there is a fundamental spirit of solidarity awaiting to be reawakened. And I think if we can all work together, whether it's the High Commission or whether it's the South African Chamber, which Sharon does such a wonderful job leading, or whether Action for Southern Africa, we can try and maximize the opportunities for the country and certainly make a difference ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. It's really, I think we do forget how it was then. I'm just a little younger than you, and I remember as a young girl, not quite 16, more like 6 kind of thing, thinking, why is this different? Why is that different? What does that sign really mean? And to a young girl, it was really quite confusing, who came from English parents who didn't understand it either. They had no real concept of what was happening in the country. So we all have our own personal experiences, good and bad, through those years, and our lives have been changed immeasurably since then. I'd like to now please introduce His Excellency High Commissioner Kingsley Mamabolo, who is a breath of fresh air, as the last 2 High Commissioners have been, both extremely different in amazing ways. But I'm just going to list the countries he has represented South Africa in. And I'm not going to go through the detail, but just the countries is Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Cuba, Ethiopia, Sudan, Djibouti, and he's been the South Africa's permanent representative to the African Union, and equally the joint representative of the Secretary General of the United Nations and chairperson also of recently of the African Union. So he has had a very serious, very senior diplomatic career for South Africa, where he has represented us in various parts of the world. He happens to be sitting in Cape Town, in Pretoria right at the moment, having to go down there for business. So he's not sitting here in the UK with us. And Tricia, you're also in another country as well. I think, Peter, you and I are the only ones in the UK at the moment between us. So Kingsley, you saw the time period that all of us did in the years prior to 94. But could you share with us what it was like to go through 1994 and give us a picture of what South Africa has delivered in Mandela's term, Mbeki's term, Zuma, and now Ramaphosa's terms, of the key highlights of those 4 chapters that we've experienced since then? And given we've got an election in a few days' time, what you might think may follow thereafter.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon. Let me first say thank you for putting this thing together and putting us together with people like Peter, not Peter Hain, the veteran Tracy Seaborns. I think just the representation here indicates the extent to which everybody was on board in putting their hands on deck to make sure that this becomes a success. The struggle, before I in fact even come to what you were saying about what we have achieved and what we have not achieved, but just to say, taking from where Peter left, the significance of this, that you had all people fighting. The ANC used to say, and the people of South Africa at that time, that what we are having is a struggle on all fronts, a struggle that is waged by the international community, a struggle that was waged here in South Africa by the masses of our people, the struggle that was waged in the underground and so on, and all this combined to deliver. When I address the UK, I always remind them that this is our baby, all of us jointly. It's a project that we delivered. And there was a reason for us, all of us, to be involved in the manner in which we were, because we share the same values. We share the need to ensure that there's human rights, whether it be in South Africa, in Palestine, or Ukraine, or anywhere in the world. We would want to see justice. We would want to see people free to be able to do what they need to do, and we would fight any discrimination, any injustice that occurs anywhere in the world. And so indeed, the work that we are all doing, the struggle that we're all waging, and I think it is ideal, it's appropriate that at this point in time, 30 years later, we're able to again meet together and say, what is it that we can do to remind everybody of the kind of work that was put in, to remind everybody of what Peter has just been saying, the kind of sacrifices that were made to make sure that indeed the people of South Africa are free. Having said that, we're going to say we should be in a position to weigh and see what is it that has been achieved in the 30 years, and what is it that is still outstanding. For somebody who was involved in about my age in the struggle, I think people my age and so on would recall what apartheid meant to us as individuals and as a people, and perhaps would have a better appreciation that much more than what we now have nowadays, what is called the born-frees, who were born after, and would not have an imagination, except, of course, reading about it, of what apartheid meant for people my generation, your generation, Sharon and Peter's generation. That for us, the freedom in 1995 meant breaking with all the laws and the rules that were enacted. I mean, if you take racism, for example, it is everywhere in the world. But South Africa was the only country that was bold enough to say we're going to enact this in law. By law in South Africa, you had discrimination in all sectors. Jobs were discriminated. Blacks had certain categories of jobs, and some of the more important employment and so on were secured for a certain section of the population, which were the whites. We've had an opportunity, therefore, to open up all this and make it possible that there is equality in terms of the law to ensure that whoever wants to pursue what they can. This is, of course, why we call on everybody to vote, because the truth of the matter is that by voting, like it happens in every nation, elections are always a way of measuring how deep democracy is for any nation. And in our nation, too, we're measuring how far we have gone. It is a way of securing our future. It is a way of ensuring that in a country which is plagued by unemployment, we can influence policies that relates to job opportunities, to education, in general, what we call service to the people. Now, any party that is in power will be measured first by all those things that I've talked about, the extent to which they are able to make these opportunities available to the people. So you've got to take it in two ways. One, breaking what legally was stopping people from moving forward in all those areas. But having done so, what we need to be able to do is to come up with policies that are creative enough to ensure that the people do get the services, that the inequality that we experienced in the past does indeed people become equally in all respect. And this is where the elections will begin to make a difference, because you're born free than others, particularly those who were not born during those days, are not in a position to, they are looking at their circumstances and their situation now and saying, what is it that needs to be improved? I just want to conclude, I know there is the issue of time, by saying 30 years in the life of any nation might look long, but it is actually very young. And as Peter said, all countries are beset by their own problems. In turn, we have to, as we move forward, the ups and downs that we're envisaging, clearly there are problems. You have load shedding, you have economic problems, you have crime at the rise at the moment. You have so many problems that are always a reminder to us that so much needs to be done still. It's not enough to come up with political freedom, which we have done. We still now need to tackle the bread and butter issues. And that's where the struggle is at the moment. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. Really appreciate it. And one thing I do notice, I do engage with many South Africans going out to the country as often as I do. And the part that I find difficult to understand sometimes is how politicized some of the born frees are, because they're clearly under 30. And how do we create a culture in South Africa of respecting our past and being able to move forward with the opportunities of the future? And just a quick question to you. Do you believe that we can move to that stage, or do you think we are there already?
Move to where, Sharon? Come again?
To a place where we respect the past, but we together move forward.
What I see, Sharon, is we're in a process of transition. We are transiting from the bad, the ugly of the past. The tendency is we expect, of course, naturally, that everything would be smooth. We're very happy when this happened. Mandela was a hero, and those that brought freedom were heroes, and so on. And of course, we thought that momentum would carry us right through to the next level without any problems. But I think practical reality has demonstrated that life is ups and downs. As I was saying not long ago in a discussion, I heard that you have your own vicissitudes of life, the ups and downs of life. And sometimes it's not just a straight line. It tips a little, and you get entangled in all sorts of problems, some of your own making. Like in our case, we have a situation where we can say mistakes were done. Some are out of control, not of our own making. If you have financial crisis in the world, if you have whatever is happening in the world, the wars that are taking place in the world that impacts on us one way or the other, and maybe not just us as South Africa, but the entire African country, if you have this problem created by the climate change and we suffer as a consequence of that, that's not of our making. But as Peter was saying, the important thing is to remember that we have a long walk to freedom. And that long walk to freedom means we must continue steadfastly in that direction with the ups and downs that I'm talking about until eventually we reach there. I have no doubt that as long as we're not there, it means the struggle has not been won yet. The struggle, what you call said, is not yet uhuru. Not yet uhuru means it's not finally what we want to achieve. And so we must be persistent and resilient and continue in the march in that direction. I have no doubt that the aspiration of our people will ensure that with our ups and downs, we do reach that stage that you are talking about.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Kingsley. Thanks for your insights. Tricia, I'd like to turn to you now. Tricia has got many, many, many accolades and has lived her life very much in the world of small charities, making a genuine difference on the ground in terms of the work of those efforts that she gets involved in. In 2020, she was the recipient of the Archbishop of Cape Town's Peace with Justice Award. And I look at how hard she works for the people of the country. That definitely is something she earned every step of her career. She's a non-executive and executive level in many charities, and most of them are around being creative, receiving education, and generating entrepreneurial opportunities. So an ideal person who has been involved in the anti-apartheid movement for probably most of your life, Tricia. Maybe you can share with us some of your personal experiences and life experiences through the days before 1994, through 1994, and the role you have played since then, and maybe some personal anecdotes to make it meaningful.
Thank you very much, Sharon, for that introduction, and greetings to everyone who's joined us. It's a wonderful opportunity to come together. That many of us have those stories, as you were saying. I was I'm a bit younger than our two esteemed lords and His Excellency, the High Commissioner. I came to South Africa issues mid-80s, really, inspired by Anglican church leaders, so Desmond Tutu and somebody called Simeon Nkwani. And so my work kind of began then. And only after Nelson Mandela was released did I go to South Africa. I spent 7 days in a township called Umzanoni near Bethel, and that completely changed my life. So that's the short story. Since then, I was very much involved in rebuilding the country post-94 with many, many others. And so funds from the UK being sent into institutions, WITS, teacher training, universities, Guyani Science Centre, with other people at IDAF and BDAF and all the other charities, of which many still exist and are still doing great work at these community levels in South Africa. So just a nod to how much work continues from those days. As far as the anti-apartheid movement, I mean, since '94, they were asked to reform in a way and look at the wider region. So once formal apartheid had fallen, then, as the High Commissioner said, then people were really confronted with the realities of what was going to be inherited. You know, so the former frontline states had made many sacrifices, their own people are sacrifices around those issues. And people coming home, so exiles coming home from the frontline states, needed a lot of support. I was involved in lots of that. Then we had the HIV and AIDS pandemic, which crushed communities. So I think there was a lot to do in terms of those early days that AXA was set up to respond to. And now, I think 30 years on, the challenge, I think, was set by Nelson Mandela when he spoke to the UK Parliament in 1996. You know, he drew attention to the fact, I mean, he said, quote, "None of us can overestimate the complexity of the challenge that faces us." I think if anybody had known how complex it would be, we might have fainted at that point. But we haven't. We've marched on and are still walking. And so I think this year is a real opportunity to renew that spirit of 1994 in the you know, with the heart that he gave us and the call that he and many others set out. What else can we do except to go on, be stronger, be more resilient, be more aligned with the people who have not yet benefited, you know, from freedom? And so that's really where AXA tries to play its part. Business is doing its part, education is doing its part, and AXA comes along in civil society spaces, so that solutions that South Africans and Southern Africans have to the issues that face them are amplified, if you like. So the solutions are coming from the region, and in that sense, helping the UK government and others to respond to what's on the ground and people on the ground, what people on the ground would like to see. And so that's really where we're coming in and trying to highlight legacies of previous to 1994, experiences and successes since 1994 that we should now be elevating and building on and expanding. So that's really kind of that role, and that's why I feel very privileged to be in this role, because it is one of listening and supporting and being alongside, because people are free now and have their own ideas about what needs to change. And I think for the UK government, that's a challenge that AXA takes up and is looking forward to engaging with this government and the next government around how it might address these issues in a new decade, for a new decade, 30 years on. So our role is really to challenge and catalyse and point and signpost to people in the region, and what they're saying is going to assist them. I'll stop there for now.
Thanks very much, Tricia, and very enlightening. And I have to pick up on one comment you said. I think people would faint if they realized how difficult the struggle was and how much we are still on that long walk to freedom. I think if the naysayers from pre-94 had ever believed we could have achieved what we did without a civil war, they'd have more than fainted. So what we achieved in 1994 cannot be underestimated, because the risks to people, to land, to business, to the economy was huge back then. And we've done it, and we all take it, to Peter's words, we actually take that element of it really for granted. It was a massive achievement to get behind one person and change a country, which was amazing at what we did achieve. He also made reference to the resilience of the need to be resilient so that we can achieve the end of the journey and get to the point that we're not struggling, to Kingsley's point, on multiple fronts at the same time. South Africa has one thing. It has got a full glass of resilience. It's got plenty of resilience in the bag. So very important that we harness that resilience. And the last point is another word that you said that sort of brought mind to me is we've got something like, I've heard anything between 64 and 76. I've no idea how many countries are going to the polls this year. It's the largest ever big election year globally, and lots of trauma that goes with it, and lots of successes, and quite a degree of change that is occurring in many countries. But the point that goes with elections quite often are queues. And I think the biggest queue I've ever stood in my life was 1994. And I understand the High Commission is doing everything it can to prevent the queues on Saturday and Sunday. And we do call all of you out to please come and vote. It is important for the country that we take up our constitutional duty. But that we will hold till later. What I'd like to do is maybe talk to Peter quickly. I know you do have to leave earlier than the rest of us, Peter. But maybe you can say, well, what can the man in the street do? What can business do? What can we do now? We've got to this part in our journey. How do we make it a success quicker?
Well, I think one of the things, especially London-based businesses with a South African flavour can do is support the different charities that are active here, those that are trying to do excellent work in difficult conditions in the country, because there's so much poverty and homelessness and unemployment. 2/3 of the Black majority are on social grants, are not in jobs. Now, a big proportion of those are elderly, but that's a lot of people. And if you want a society, if you want the economy to grow, you've got to try and encourage those people to get the skills they need to get into jobs and be able to make a contribution for themselves, their families, and of course the wider country. So I think there's a lot that can be done. The fashion, if I could put it that way, or perhaps fashion is not the right word, the willingness to fund charities is not what it was in the rose-tinted period after 1994, when it was easy to raise money for charities. It isn't now. So you can do a lot as South African Chamber members, and people who have an interest in the country, perhaps still, rooted in the country, as I once was. There's a lot that can be done. I think Tricia's got other examples of what is being done, and you probably do too. But everybody, I'm very much of the view that we can all make a difference. Some of us at a certain level, others just making a difference in our own businesses, our own lives, and in our own ways. And that's all important. It isn't the case that the person on the platform or with the profile is doing something more important than the small business in London that's supporting a charity. They're all important.
I think, Peter, that you're absolutely right there. When you think of, if every one of us did one thing, just think how many hundreds of thousands, millions of change will occur cumulatively if we all did something. It's a bit like looking after our planet. If we all do something, it's going to move the dial. And we can't expect that dial to move if we sit and watch and wait for others to do it. We need to be proactive. And I think that's the important part I'd like to make sure that we get across in this messaging is, what are we able to do outside the country as the 11th province, I think, is what can we actually do in the country that does make a difference? And we can. Our sterling goes a lot further than a rand. So making sure we can reduce 20 of them and make sure that it can be used to generate the economy. And that starts with food, or health, food, education, entrepreneurialism, so the whole lot moves up the food chain. But maybe, Tricia, you can share with us a idea of what is in line for us for the year ahead, some of the things that are already in the calendar. I know there's a lot more going in, and I'll add to those any that I might know of afterwards. But just give us an idea of where we can go and where we can start this journey that Peter has said that we need to do something, each one of us.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, so there is a website that's been set up that's sa2024.org, and that is beginning to collate and collect the activities that are happening across the UK. Some of them are already highlighted there, and that is growing as people contribute and become what we call Friends of 2024. So there is a way that you can get directly involved by supporting the marketing of the year and also the cultural events that are underpinning the year. Culture has been an important employer for artists and creatives, and also being able to support them to travel and to take cultural tourism out of South Africa into the rest of the world. And that's something that we focused on, almost a kind of anti to the way the boycott used to work, the cultural boycott. So it's more pro, with those days when we didn't buy oranges, and now what we want to do is to buy as many oranges as we possibly can. The equivalent is to encourage as many creatives and artistic businesses to be supported. The UK can accommodate that. It has a market, it has an interest for creatives. So creatives, there's a creative program and you are able to support that. There's theatre, there's film, there's music going on, there are book launches to talk about books. But there are also other opportunities. So for instance, we are wanting to commission a piece of music that's being written between South African musicians and young jazz musicians in the UK at the National Youth Jazz Orchestra. So if anybody's interested in supporting that, the 30 at 30 is a lovely series of videos where we're featuring 30 young South Africans who are already leaders in their field, across business, across the arts, across engineering and science and social work. And the idea about this is to be encouraging those young people and letting them be seen, really, because the future, they're really building the future South Africa. So that's a lovely series that companies can get involved in sponsoring, so that they'll have some content for their websites. We're identifying young people all the time in different spheres and sectors. And that's really about highlighting the journey that we're still on. There are a couple of milestone events. So the High Commission is hosting a service of Thanksgiving at the Abbey in July. The High Commission
Westminster Abbey.
In Westminster Abbey in July. And that will be a place where we can come together and really, as a nation, as the UK, symbolise that relationship between the UK and South Africa and why it's so important. So invitations and tickets will be available for that during next week. And that is a sort of what I'd call a milestone event. And around that, we have sort of anchoring events. So next year, we're planning a symposium of young women from Southern Africa talking about the issues that affect them and how the UK, for instance, could address its aid budgets and its aid programs to deal with some of the things that affect women in particular. A music festival in September, which is Heritage Month in South Africa. We also have our Tambo Day in October. Obviously, we have Mandela Day in July. So there are ways that you can get involved in these kind of anchoring events that where national days already exist, and we're building around that. But I think we're trying to also focus on the range of charities that exist in the UK already. So those charities will be featured on the website. It'll enable people to go and see what's available in one space, which is actually quite difficult, but hopefully this website will have life after 2024, where it can really kind of showcase the community in the UK that's working for the benefit of Southern African businesses, as well as trade, as well as culture. So the idea is to kind of coalesce everything that's happening, have a window for it through the website, and link people up in perhaps ways that we're not linked already. So beyond a business supply chain, what cultural events are happening that we might help, for instance. I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you very much. Peter, I am mindful that you're probably getting to within 5 minutes of wanting to do a runner, which I totally respect and understand, and thank you for giving us our time. Just given your experience of writing your novels that you've been doing, your challenging books about South Africa and the difficulty of poaching and the issues that we have at that level, which a lot of us don't always talk about, the environment, the elephants, the rhinos, the lions, which are your three themes that you've spoken about, these conspiracies. And maybe we can just cover somewhere there how that can help us look forward as a support to our nation. How can people reading that think differently? Would they?
Well, I don't want to turn this into a commercial plug for the three thrillers, though you're almost inviting me to. If you get a chance, do go to one of the many wonderful South African safari parks, because they are magical and they are safe, provided you're properly guided. I mean, safe in the sense of you will have a really enjoyable, relaxing time there. It's an unbeatable experience. But be aware too that there's a lot of poaching. Lions used to number 200,000 a century ago. Now they're just 20,000, and they'll be extinct in 25 years' time unless something's done. And they're victims, like rhinos and elephants are, and other endangered species, of international criminal syndicates, very often protected by corrupt politicians, that are behind this poaching. This is on a scale with drug trafficking and people trafficking. It's a huge international scourge, and the governments of the world are not doing enough about it. So these thrillers highlight that. But perhaps it allows me also to stress something I started off with, which is it's a wonderful place, a wonderful country to visit. And when I talk to people I know or bump into about this, they say, but is it safe? And I say, well, you know, if you go around the centre of Johannesburg at night, probably it isn't safe. But who'd want to do that? There are lots and lots of places in the country which you can feel perfectly safe and secure in, and have probably one of the best holidays you'll ever have. So I think it's important to spread that word, as I say, without. And I think I'm the last person to attempt to gloss over some of the problems facing the country, but it is also a country with tremendous amount to offer.
It has got a huge amount to offer, and one of the loveliest things it offers is you fly in, you get the smiles, the smells of the earth, the smells of Africa, and you immediately feel different, and it is different, and it's such a magical experience. Thank you, Peter, and thanks for just sharing those
Thank you, and thank
issues.
you for all the 50 people or so that have joined us, which is
Yes, and we've
great.
got plenty more who have registered, which is looking forward to them picking up on the recording. I've now forgotten what my train of thought was, but yes, maybe I can turn to you, Kingsley, just to chat
Bye,
about.
everybody, and thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Bye.
Don't want to chase you away, but you're welcome. Kingsley, you saw this as quite a passion of yours in your 4-year term here to make this 2024 year and a bit that we're putting things together. And you were the one who put out the seeds and pulled in the fishing lines and actually started to get a number of people to work together. Why did you want to do that?
Well, Sharon, I think what is important, that the mission is, we need to remind ourselves of what we all did in the 30 years. And that is why the collaboration with Tricia, with Peter, with yourselves, all people who were involved, who can't forget what this journey has meant in the 30 years, is important, particularly in this period in time when some people want to begin to have doubts, to remind everybody that South Africa continues to be the destination of choice. South Africa continues to be full with potential, as Peter and yourself has indicated. And I think Tricia took some time going through some of the issues at a cultural level that we are organizing and they are organizing, involved in. But eventually, what we're also looking at are the main core issues. Like, we want to ensure that there is a flow of foreign direct investment. That you would know better, Sharon, as somebody in the chamber, that what indeed eventually would help this situation is how much we can tap into the foreign direct investment of the UK and make sure that part of that, a large chunk of that, comes in the direction of South Africa. We want to ensure that there is investment. Our president organizes these trade investment conferences every year, and in which a new target has been put. Right now, we're trying to reach a target of about 2 trillion in terms of investment that must come to South Africa. And so far, we've met all the targets since the conference that the president has been hosting had started. And so this is our engagement. What areas do we invest in? In practically everything that is of need in South Africa. And maybe let me just select one that is important, where we need to draw attention to, is the area of energy, alternative sources of energy, for example, solars and whatever form of energy. Right now, I find in the UK, everybody is talking a lot about green hydrogen and all sorts of other alternative sources of energy that would benefit particularly South Africa in these difficult times of load shedding and so on. To augment the work that ministers are doing inside the country, I've heard now that it looks like we're moving away from the serious problems we've had of load shedding. And how can we ensure that we sustain that in a big way? South Africa, in the area of green hydrogen, I'm told we have, everyone tells me we have the greatest potential. We have the Indian Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, we have the wind, we have everything. And so indeed, in terms of the policy that we're putting together, I saw the policy that the Department of Minerals and Energy is putting together to try and consulting everyone to ensure that indeed we have a policy that would ensure South Africa in the end benefits. One other issue that has come out since I'm High Commissioner, people are also looking at what they call the critical minerals for just transitioning. Just transitioning is an issue. As you know, we have received some huge chunk of money that would help with the just transitioning. And in our case, very important, because you do have to transit from the old way we were doing things, from coal that dominated the energy, what you call in South Africa. How do we transit from that? What do we do with the our skilled workers? How do we skill workers? How do we impart the necessary skills to ensure that indeed they do transit and they are not left behind? What do you do with the huge amount of coal that we have in South Africa? All that kind of thing. What do we do indeed? Now, adding to what Tricia was talking about, to the activities of the socio-cultural nature, are these kind of activities that I'm mentioning. We also need to remind people of tourism. You yourself and Peter have been talking about. And then, of course, we need to bring attention as well to the environment. Southern Africa has been beset by a very serious problem in the floods, and sometimes the countries become dry and we don't have water, and every time we are hit hard. All these have huge impact on our economy and our ability to do anything. Now, any of those areas I've mentioned, once we are successful, as Peter was saying earlier, there's still a lot of huge interest in South Africa. Whenever we talk to people out there, we see the response. People are looking ahead beyond the problems that we may be entertaining now. And people know that this is a country with huge potential, and if we all focus, it is going to rise and be up there. And I think they want to be part of that activity as well. So I am very happy with this collaboration that Tricia has mentioned, that you yourself, and I'm sure this is the manner in which we're going to conduct our activities as Team South Africa on the ground, to ensure that indeed we don't leave anything behind or leave anybody behind in ensuring that our people move forward.
Thank you for that, Kingsley. I'll come to you in a moment, Tricia. Just a quick point. I was picking up on some facts for some other purpose last week. And the tourists, British tourists to the UK number in the region of about 400,000 a year, which is lower than it's been at its peak. But the interesting thing is every single one of us listening, and families, friends, and everybody else we know out there in the world, can also travel to South Africa safely, as Peter says. That employs people. It's probably one of the quickest ways to have investment in and employment generated in South Africa is to go and visit the country. And to the point we're talking about now in terms of some of the negative aspects around our tourism and risks of that, is now you seldom see dehorned rhinos. You seldom see them in their absolutely spectacular glory of their full horns in place because of what the world is doing. So it'll be interesting to see, because the more investment you do in traveling to South Africa, going and seeing these magical animals and places, we can allow them to grow their horns and they don't have to be taken off. So it's just something very, very tangible that followed on the two conversations that have just been ahead of me. Tricia, do you want to pick up on any of the points before I make any closing comments? And by the way, everybody, there's a long chat worth looking at quickly before it closes, before we close, but I will leave the video on for at least a minute or so that you can finish reading them, where some of the ideas and charities are being mentioned, some of the efforts are being mentioned. Tricia.
I think, I mean, thanks for those comments, John and High Commissioner. There are, the year is about remembering. So if you come to any of the events, it will remind people of what happened, where we've come from, but the focus is to the future. And so it is about forming partnerships, having conversations that we haven't had before. It's a year to highlight how much has been achieved, as you've both said, but it is about committing to joint action for the future. And the way we have those conversations is often through cultural meetings. I say cultural, I mean going to the theatre, having a dialogue after a film showing. We've got all of these things happening through the year as a way to stimulate conversations that say, oh, well, if we partner with you, perhaps we could do X. And that's really what's behind this energy, this spirit, this kind of drawing on that 1994 high, and reinventing that momentum that the High Commissioner mentioned, to say we need to travel a little further, but we need to do it together.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do know that African proverb well. And in the spirit of Ubuntu, we need to help from this province outside the country of what is happening inside the country for all of us, for our families, for the country, for the people of the country. That means so much to all of us. But just a quick summary and just a note to say that the Chambers event that is being held South Africa in the city is going to be on the 17th of July, where we are meeting with the Lord Mayor, and we have some follow-on events and ceremonies that will occur that day. As just another example, and that's the first of our in the city ones directly. We also have the gala dinner, where once again the Lord Mayor is hosting us. So again, visibility of South Africans in our penguin suits in the city, in the Lord Mayor's mansion. So there are things that we're doing as well to make sure South Africa is remembered. I remember, must be 7 odd years ago, I was the director of the chamber already, and I'd just become the chairman. And somebody said to me, who is the chamber? Who is South Africa? We don't know you in the city. We don't know. Why do we know who Australia is, but we don't know who you are? That was like somebody putting a knife into my chest. And I thought, one thing we need to do is ensure this country knows what South Africa is. This country, the UK, is known better to South Africans than South Africa is to Britons. So it's for us to make sure that we do sell our country, and we do sell it to the UK, to manufacturers, to exporters, to importers, to charities, to people in the philanthropic world, because that is what's going to put South Africa on the map, not only on the tip of Africa. So it is important that we do all make that effort. And there's wonderful aspects of activities being shared here on the chat. Thank you, all of us. So please make contact. We'll put up the South African Chamber website now for you quickly, and have a look at some of the events we're doing. We've got a very busy diary as well. Ours being typically more business orientated, networking orientated, which is why we have such a pleasure of working with AXA now and with Trisha, who is like, she and I are like two sides of one coin, completely different, but with one aligned journey of where we're going. And thank you, High Commissioner. You bring all these opportunities for foreign investment, cultural investment, people investment that South Africa so looks forward to. So I'd like to thank you both, and Peter Hain in absentia, for sharing what you've got ahead and what we can all do to actually engage in the culture of our birth, or in the one we don't know yet much about. And let's look forward to being able to go to South Africa and see a country that is talking about the struggle, not the struggle, because we want to conclude that long journey to a point where we are comfortable and respectful of our past, but working together for our future. So whether we do that in song or dance or looking at rhino horns, let's get on with good business and good networking. And thank you, sir. Thank you, High Commissioner.
Thank you.
It's through
Thank
your
you,
efforts that we
Thanks,
got this
everybody.
going all together. And Trisha, your energy is unstoppable. You're amazing. 10 out of 10 for you, actually 20 out of 10 for all your efforts that you put on. So thank you so much. Really, really, really do appreciate everything that is done for the country we care for.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye
Thanks,
for now.
everybody.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.